The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people are evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. There's still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, a group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Hello everyone, I'm geologist Philip Ong here with Mr. Dane DuPont of Hawaii Tracker, bringing you guys another Hawaiian Volcano Tracker update. We put in a little new plus Samoa since we're talking about Samoa a little bit these days too, since it's under the HVO purview. Today, Thursday, August 25th, 2022. It's pretty much business as usual in Kilauea. There's a few little quirks we'll talk about. Maybe a slight change in eruption rate, but that was kind of a couple weeks ago. Already, we'll talk about Mauna Loa. Looks like the signals are all kind of correcting there, so really nothing that unusual to talk about. We'll just kind of catch up on that and touch base with what the USGS is doing in Samoa one more time. So kind of a standard update today. We'll go through the paces. I know there's some other things happening in the community, but we'll kind of circle back to them. What do you think, Dane? What have you got for us today?
Yeah, there's some things that, last week we left off on, one of them being Poiki, and we're not really going to have much of a follow-up in this episode, really because there hasn't been anything released to follow up on that presentation that was presented by Sea Engineering and the state of Hawaii. So once that report comes out, then we'll be able to, better go through it and analyze it and be able to discuss with you guys the implications and how solid it may or may not be. But until that point, we're kind of just waiting. There's no real need for us to jump out and start, really going after it until we have access to the report and the data that they may or may not have. So yeah, hopefully next week, but there's no estimated time of arrival on that thing either. But just wanted to give a little update on that. Otherwise, we got a pretty standard update that we're going to go into here. Kilauea, Mauna Loa, and a little bit of American Samoa.
All right, thanks, Dane. So with that, we'll get into it here. So starting off on Kilauea, what we have playing for you guys is just a little clip from the USGS time-lapse released in the last couple days on YouTube. And I'm sure this will be part of an update that we'll see coming, but it's been a little slow with the USGS website and the output. So we'll show you guys just a YouTube video for now. This was back on a week ago today, I think, August 18th, and viewed from the end of the lava lake. See the lava is coming out from the bottom end right here, down in here, and moving to the north, and gets recycled back in there. Goes through a little now submerged pathway into the pit in the southeast. It's just barely visible off the side right over here. And it also turns and comes up to the side over here, to this northeast corner, where it's also seems to be retreating as well. So one of the stories that we can share a little bit is that while everything continues to rise and fill, all kind of business as usual, you can tell from some of the maps that the area of the open lava pit is actually shrinking a little bit. So it's just very slowly coming in from the edges, and that's just while it's lifting. And so we'll have to consider whether one day it'll actually close all the way off, but it's still doing it at a fairly slow rate that it's just a once in a while we'll mention it kind of thing. But so we'll get into the circulation of what you see here a little bit later. Let me move on for now and play for you guys. I just want to show you guys out here. This is a screen capture that Dane got from the KW camera. Let me zoom into it a little bit here. And so we have our persistent lava lake over here on the right. And this is the outline of the rocks on this edge of the cliff in the foreground view here. And you can see a big ooze-up flow has broken out down below the cliff, and it's silhouetting these rocks and illuminating this whole area down here. So I thought this would be a kind of cool thing to dive into a little bit. That's really been the story of this past week, is we've seen a little bit more ooze-up flows. So I just clipped from that KW camera just that one ooze-up flow here, and let's zoom into it and show you guys what that actually looks like, that ooze-up flow, just silhouetting those rocks a little bit more artistic perhaps, but a cool little event, and kind of capturing the more photogenic events that we have on camera here. Sometimes they happen farther away or in bad weather or that kind of thing, so this is a cool one to capture. KW camera, and we also have, in this case, from the reverse angle, this is the S1 camera from the south. And so we're looking now from the opposite direction. Here's that persistent lava lake, and there in the background, up there, that's that breakout flow there. And so pretty cool to see that. You see it seems to be bubbling up in a little area right in here. So depending on exactly when you come to visit the park and see the volcano, there's always a chance something like this is going on, and besides the main active lava lake, you have a big breakout like that. So I'll zoom it out a little bit so you really can see the size of that breakout compared to the lava lake is fairly similar, right? Big areas that can be seen from far away. So ooze-up flows, that's really the story. Ooze-up flows and more infilling of the summit crater this week. There's the KW camera last 24 hours, so what the volcano looked like earlier today. You can see some changing wind. At one point it blocks the camera view entirely here and blows back out, and that's one thing we'll see today also, is some swirling winds with some fog occurring around the island, but kind of in transition from place to place. So let's go back to the whole last week here on Kilauea, the whole last KW camera. We saw that little ooze-up flow down here in the bottom, and you see there's another ooze-up flow here in the northeast. Depending whether it's day or night, it's a little bit harder to see on this visible light camera, but there are some happening here along this back wall in this eastern sector as well. And now we've looped back around, so we're seeing that same event again. So let me advance from here, and let's go to the F1 camera, our thermal camera, that is easier to track across day and night. And so there is that big ooze-up flow in the foreground. You can see it continues a little bit to the south here. There's a second ooze-up flow here on this eastern segment. A third one comes in down here at the bottom. There's kind of a fourth and fifth one that gets that I missed here up in this upper right corner in the southeast section over here too. So you really see it's popping up over the last week, more easily visible on this F1 camera. Even though the edges are cropped off, you can still see that there's at least five different pulses of ooze-ups coming up. There's one, there's two over here, 3, 4 down here on the right, and then 5 back up here on the right again. So it's interesting to see that pattern. And otherwise, looking into the main active lava lake, ignoring all the surroundings, you don't see a whole lot of change in elevation. It is changing slightly. We'll look at the graph. You don't see a whole lot of change in the southeast pit either, but what is noticeable if you've been following it for a while is how wide this tunnel, right? This I guess we could call it a lava tube between this main active lake and the southeast pit now has formed. This is the thing we saw form an archway and collapse and form and collapse over and over. So interesting to see how wide it's gotten and how thick that archway must actually be now below there. All right, that's the F1. Let's keep moving on through our weekly summary here. And that's just the last 24 hours. You can see still some activity here in that southeast corner, eastern sector, and hard to tell what's happening elsewhere off the screen here on this cropped view. So zoomed in on a V1 camera, there's the last 24 hours. You can see the nighttime views, the cracks in that crust, the lava lakes forming that crust, and that crust is circulating as we saw in that initial video today. Let me go ahead and advance that to the whole last week. Then we'll play this in a loop as well. So one thing you may have noticed is it used to be that this video, the lava was getting truncated off on this right end, on this left end over here. And more we keep seeing that retreat. And it seems like we have a camera jumps here, so forgive it if it's not exactly centered all the time here. But we have this inner berm that's forming around the lava lake. So I can put it back in place here, and it basically seems to be widening and withdrawing, almost like it's forming a perched pond within that pit, and something like that. And we have continued spattering happening here at the eastern end. You don't see a whole lot of change or fluctuation there, but it seems like it stays at a fairly consistent level, even though the camera is moving here. And then let me pan it over to look at that little isthmus, that little lava tube. You can see the ground really fuming in between there, so you can see that there's some pathway. That's interesting to see that surface developing here, be wide enough and sustaining that steaming or fuming area. And otherwise, you can look into that southeast pit from this angle and see that it too keeps jumping around. It too is also forming an inner perched pond apparently, and it seems to be withdrawing from the edges a little bit. So its surface is also closing in. So that's basically the process that we're seeing there is it's growing these benches out from the inner part of these pits, and that seems to be shrinking the lava surface. But otherwise, continually the lava is moving along the surface and recycling itself. So we'll move on. We'll look at that. We'll come back to that topic shortly, but to round out our webcams, we'll look next at this S1 camera. There is our ooze-up flow above the persistent lake. You can see the glow from the west vent fuming over here, and some of these ooze-up flows also in the nighttime becoming more apparent. You can, from this angle, also zoom in on that southeast pit, and you can see from that reverse angle that fuming bridge now that's in between those two areas. And interestingly, you can see more glow further down over here towards the edge of this raised up, cracked area that's corresponds to that innermost crust of the lava lake. That was the more buoyant part. It seems to be lifting as the lava is filling underneath it. So that whole thing lifts up like a floating cork in a way, and then it oozes up, flows out the sides between those cracks. It's filling in that moat area around the outside. So that's the reverse angle from the S1. And here are the last 24 hours, showing similar views there as well. So I'll switch here to looking at that video a little bit more closely that we just discussed. Let me see if I can find the right title here. Let's go to our media and look at this August 18th USGS time-lapse sequence at 100 times speed, showing the motion of the lava lake in Halemaumau and the orientation we provided before. So let's move on and start this thing back up again and look in a little more detail here. Right, we talked about the pathways of the lava already, but we can actually look a little more closely at how the crust is actually separating. This is a cool little thing here. So you see that these plates are forming. There's a big, almost tongue area that seems to form right in there, and it's carried off in that direction. But there's a area right here in the middle where you seem to see some spreading. The lava seems to go in both directions, left and right from there. And so it's coming up along that axis and then circulating over to the directions there and there. Right? And interestingly as well, if you look at this southernmost edge over here on the right, see a little bit of spattering happening in this edge right over here. And you also see the crust getting circulated and recycled in that area as well, that way and in there too, when you see it at this speed. Right, so you seem to have some, it's coming out going this way, and then it's actually rising and pushing to the sides where it then gets recycled back in. And it's happening in both directions, and then further up where it goes into that, well, right in here is that area where it's going into that tunnel, lava tube into that pit. And over here to the left side, that main eastern sink. And so you can see all the crust gets recycled. By the time it gets to this far end, everything goes back under. There's no place where these rafts are accumulating or anything like that. If anything, it's just growing this bench outwards. One lava level stays fairly steady, essentially. So there's a little bit of deep dive into that circulation pattern. It's pretty cool. It's pretty consistent, but it's not like when we saw the lava lake in Halemaumau from 2008 to 18, where some days it'll be circulating south to north, and other days it'll be going from north to south and reversing, and that was cool to track. It's consistently going from west to east and doing that pattern. But we don't often have the feed in this resolution with, like, you know, someone actually filming it and speeding it up, right? Rather than catching the frame every 15 minutes from the webcams. So different time scales, that's one of the cool things about geology, is thinking about different time scales, and I appreciate the USGS sharing that different time scale with us of the lava lake circulation there. So pretty cool. So that's really it for the media this week. So we will switch from that to the lava viewing, of which all these changes in the lava lake are an interesting aspect, but I thought we could start off with a map, and I'll just recap a little bit what the views are from these webcams, right? So first of all, there is an inner pit of Halemaumau, and really this inner area is mostly filled in all the way to there. That pit no longer exists. All that's that where the lava has filled up and has that crust and is liquid largely in that core of it, right in the center, where it hasn't hardened against that old crater wall or the rising surface as it's lifting up. Now being filled from below, the vents below the surface, right? It's filling from below and injecting, and that whole thing is bobbing upwards. So where we can see, and we've discussed before, Wikahuna view in the north, Kupinaipali, also known as Waldron's Ledge here in the east, and Kanakakoi in the southeast. These are the public viewing areas. Now the old USGS building is at Wikahuna, and they also traverse and have their other web cameras in this closed area that's down here in a downwind direction, right? So some of those views you're seeing from the KW camera look like they're somewhere in here. Can't tell exactly, but you'd say it's somewhere in this quadrant up in here, and they're looking in that direction like that. And that S1 camera is somewhere down in this area, looking more like this. And we saw a view of that time lapse taken somewhere in between, perhaps. But there's also another camera that's the B1 camera that's positioned over here on the right, and it looks more into here. So that view is a little bit more similar to what you might see from Kanakakoi or from Kupinaipali from those directions, right? So maybe we'll switch to using that one as a proxy for what you might actually see from these more popular areas, right? And it's all about the cliff of this inner collapse zone in here. And wherever you are, you can't see what's directly below the cliff, and that's why each area has a unique, different view, and why you can't see the active lava lake area directly from Wikahuna yet. As the surface rises, that may change. But you can see this eastern segment where you can have these big ooze-up flows from time to time. So more reliable is Kupina'ipali here in the east and Kanakako'i here in the south. So there is the B1 camera, the last 24 hours. Lava Lake is further back. Now this B1 camera is a little bit lower angle, so it's actually not as good a view as you have from up on the upper caldera wall from the public overlooks. But you still get the idea of it's a small thing covering a small part of the crater fairly far away. And you can see other areas that have ooze-up flows and maybe not as evident in the last 24 hours. So let's advance here to looking at the whole last week from the B1 camera, and you can see some of these other ooze-up flows occurring closer, other parts of the view, depending on which angle you're looking from. There's a big one happening over here in the foreground. So pretty cool to see the ooze-ups back. Some weeks we've seen more, some weeks we've seen less, and it seems like this has been a week of more of them, which is fascinating. And we'll come back to that within the monitoring pattern here in not too long. But first, we'll return to showing you guys a little clip of two pineapples from the public viewing area. You can see here two camera shots, the one on the right, a little bit farther out, showing the edges of the lava lake where those spattering sinks are and the lava is shooting up, and then over here on the left zoomed in a little closer. So you can get a better idea there of what might be visible, right? But putting it all in perspective for you guys definitely want to bring some binoculars or something along those lines to makes all the difference. Telescope, spotting scope, what have you. Big camera lens. And check out these guys on YouTube if you're not able to come and see it yourself, right? Two pineapples on YouTube. They're going out there and streaming with these big lenses, so that's really nice, and appreciate them sharing this footage with us. Mahalo, you guys. So that is the viewing. Of course, make sure to check the National Park website at all times for public closures. They have a whole eruption viewing site where you can see here the current conditions, webcams, that map I just showed you guys, day and nighttime views from each area, viewing tips, all those kind of things. But also the current conditions, right? So we'll switch to looking at that next. Is our hazard summary, and starting with the viewing areas in the park. Here is the National Park current air quality page, and you can see we have a brown circle here. It's showing slack winds, but earlier it was from the north-northwest. It was actually pointing off a plume down in this direction over here. So the winds have been unusual from time to time today, perhaps, maybe over the last few days. Everything is in the green here in a national park right now. But you can go to the history, we can scroll back in time and see there were a couple of spikes earlier today, and if we click on this advisory by site, history by site down in here, then we can get a breakdown by site, as it says. Let's let it load here. I don't think I've preloaded this one. So let's see if it'll load, but if not, then I can say that there were some measurements earlier that seemed like the wind was blowing down over here. There were some measurements over at Kahuku, down in the southwest part of the island as well. So it seems like the wind is taking the VOG to different places at different times and pretty concentrated amounts. So that's the pattern here today. We'll just move on from that to look at the VOG mapping project from weather.hawaii.edu and show you guys with the latest weather forecast and emissions input of 1,253 tons per day of SO2, the current forecast, and still for the most part taking the VOG southwest from Kilauea to this South Hawaii area, but at times really dispersing significantly, other times concentrating quite a bit. So, but for the most part, according to the forecast is for that southwest sector, which continues to have impacts, of course, right? And here's our citizen science monitoring purple air network. And some of these sites down here in the south corner, we can click on them and you can see here they're cutting into the yellow several times over the last few days here on the EPA PM 2.5 air quality index here. So that is the continuing impact is just the gas. There is no other signal of any change in the volcano that would affect people and any other way yet. And of course, we're taking a chance for education about the volcanoes to prepare for when something does happen, but we're not seeing the signs of it yet. Of course, we know that's why many of you guys are here, so we'll make sure we talk about the monitoring signals and what the volcano looks like it's doing from the hard data here. So switching from our hazards to our monitoring, although the first thing we'll look at is this gas. You can see from one station at Sand Hill over the last month on Kilauea, these spikes up to 4 to 5 ppm. This is in the closed area of the park, but it gives you an idea of how it really depends on the time of day and the weather, and it can vary quite a bit significantly. And that's just at one particular individual site, and that's different from what we've usually reported here, which is this next plot down here, which is the integrated measurement of SO2 that the HVO scientists are measuring and calculating and putting out, right? So it's a whole process to do this is done manually, and that's why you don't see it automatic all the time. And that means that sometimes you don't see trends because you don't have enough data points in a certain time window, and sometimes you do see quite a bit of stuff going on, and sometimes it's just hard to tell. So here we are with our SO2. We've had some recent low measurements down here in a 1,200 tons per day range, the most recent one here. That's within a regular range, but certainly at the lower end from what we've seen recently, and it's kind of been a question of why that's the case, and we really don't know if we're just missing data or if there are lower measurements consistently over time. And one thing that's interesting that we talked about was that possible change that we saw on a GPS. We'll come back to that. It seems to have stabilized, but we will see that there is a pattern here. Maybe an association that we see between this pattern of ooze-ups, the summit tilt, and the eruption rate, which we'll get to here shortly. Right, so first looking at the tilt, you can see the summit tilt has a lot of pattern of deflation-inflation events, but the overall pattern has been up for the most part, right? And that's something that is not exactly visible in the SO2 data that we can see for those reasons we described earlier, perhaps. So focusing more on a tilt as a more complete record, right? It seems like there was some kind of change that occurred here towards the end of July, and it seems to have changed once again, right? Maybe 17th or 18th or 19th of August here, right? Where we seem to have broken this pattern of having smaller deflation-inflation events that are back to back to back to back to back to back. And had a double here that was larger, and then had none, and now we've had one small one. So something is changing maybe in here, but the pattern seems to be a little bit disrupted at the very least. And that is fascinating when we talk about the rates, which we'll do here shortly. But let's cover the rest of this monitoring data. Lava depth for the last month is a little bit blown out from some measurements that probably reflected against some fog or something in the air that really skewed it. So really the whole real data is the little wiggles in the line down here. Hard to tell. You can see it's rising and wiggling, but it's not really that far beyond 370. We can look at the 1 week plot to get a little more clarity there. So here we're zooming in on our more recent, less typical deflation-inflation pattern from this month anyways. And there is our summit lava depth mirroring that pattern pretty closely. You see a lot of these smaller variations up and down, right? Almost like it's sloshing around. And then you see the overall trend changing and mirroring. And this is within a range of, this says 371.4 meters and 370 meters right in here, right? So 1.5 meters-ish, a little bit less than that is the range, which is a lot less than what we've seen in the past. So here is for the whole eruption from September to now. And here we are on the right side, still this upward climb. I can zoom in. Maybe I can zoom in there. So you see that the rate of rise, it's still coming up, but it's not incredibly fast, and it's certainly less than the variation we've seen in single deflation-inflation cycles earlier when the lava level was rising and falling quite a bit more. So that's fascinating as well. So the GPS is the last piece here before we turn to the rates, and this is that summit caldera north to south distance. And last week we were seeing what looked like some variation that maybe could have been a drop, and here we are this week with the data filling back in and self-correcting really, and you can see the longer term trend now really seems to be the same as before, with not a whole lot of change there. A lot of short-term variation, so all of the changes we're seeing were real, but that really gives you some idea of the variation that can occur in short-term and long-term, and how long you have to wait to see these signals be consistent to really believe some imminent change is coming. So that's back to normal, and that kind of erases any of the possible changes we were seeing last week. And looking here at the East Rift at Pu'o'o, it still continues in this downward trend. Not a really whole lot of change there. So that is the monitoring data on Kilauea. I did keep promising this whole rates talk, so let's get into that a little bit. Here's the most recent USGS daily update from today, this morning. So we're still at alert level watch, aviation code orange, no significant changes at the summit or either rift zone, and everything is basically as it has been. So we're really looking for the small changes of the numbers reported here. And the reporting overflight measurements from August 16th indicated the crater floor had seen a total rise of 137 meters or 449 feet, or that 104 million cubic meters, 27.5 billion gallons of lava had been diffused since the beginning of this eruption, September 29th, 2021. So they report SO2 here, but it's really that measurement, 104. We can scroll down, there's really no other change in the report, but this is the source, of course, and credit to them for all the information they're putting out. Here's Overflight thermal map, and you can see that open lava area as these warmer colors, oranges and reds and yellows, and its blue is that hardened crust that's covering all the lava underneath there, right? Especially in the center, over this old crust that was present at the beginning of this eruption in September. So just a small area is the active lake there, and zooming out, that's how it fits within that larger collapse pit and within a larger caldera as well, right in there. So the rates, what's going to tell me about that? So, okay, well, we'll just skip the USGS error and go right here to the map. And so here's the most recent map from August 18th. And as you guys know, I like to zoom in here, and the more precise number is 103.9 million cubic meters. So we can use that and compare it to the previous values, 27.4 billion gallons, according to this. Right? And if you're curious, the active lava lake extent is 3 acres out of the full 282 acres. Right, so that's less than 1%, or about 1% maybe now. So shrinking a bit. Nope. Come back, please. All right, so that's the overall view, and here is the overflow area that's forming this crusted area right in there. So this is August 18th and 103.9. Our last map was August 8th. We had 102.5. So we added 1.4 million cubic meters, but it's really not as much as we've seen between that last map and the one before that was 98.3. So that one had jumped up about 4-ish. And the one before that was 94.8, so 3.5-ish before that, right? So maybe what you can see there is that if I advance through these maps, that you can see the overflow area. Overflow area is expanding on the outside, and right at the center, that little red dot in the middle is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. I go from this older map to younger, to younger, to younger. Moves a little bit there, but that's the pattern, and that's the shrinking that you can see, right? And that widening gap visible both in the pit there, and let's see if I can zoom it in. similarly on this one. Yeah, something like that. You can see it quite a bit. Oh, jumping in too much there. Quite a bit smaller. So here's the chart. We're at 103.9 at the right end here, so still coming up. If I zoom it in, you can see a little bit more of the slope of the line is a little bit shallower, so it's slightly slower than it was this previous couple intervals, but it's similar to what we saw between the end of June and early July, actually, right? So not that long ago. And converting that to cubic meters per second, that puts us down here back at 1.4, so we're back down to a similar 1.3 value, and it seems like we're really bouncing around. And interesting to see another low value coming here within essentially 6 weeks-ish, or 4 to 6 weeks-ish. And this may be the first indication that maybe it's wanting to trend downwards, because really before that it's been consistently stable at a higher end there, right? So is it starting to trend downwards, perhaps? Is this maybe an indication? Combined with lower SO2 rates, it's hard to really tell. But that's something that's a little doubt is maybe creeping in now that you see 2 of these in a short time. But I think that when you look at the interval that this covers, this is that same period. If I come back to the 1 month tilt over here, this is the same period where we saw these back-to-back small deflation-inflation events, right? And not as many ooze-up flows, and that's where that measurement was taken, is that period of 12 days in there. Maybe it's more in here, something like that. But since then, things seem to have changed a little bit. The ooze-up flows are back. The subtle change in the deflation-inflation pattern here seems to have become evident. And I would suppose that we'll see the rate pop back up again and wiggle around until it settles back up at some higher rate here than a slower value. So still to be determined how long this thing takes to peter off, how long it stays open, and how long it can persist. We really don't know the answer to that question. We'll have to wait and see, but it certainly is possible that that top lake closes off and zips all the way up. That's what we saw happen the last time. So wouldn't be surprising at some point, but starting to see first indications the rate goes down enough, and we see that keep closing in, and maybe within a few months we'll see it zip all the way up, and at that point will it keep rising from below, and we'll just have to wait and see. Who really knows? I see a question come in here from Mark Sorensen. Is it possible we're looking at formation of an upper magma chamber up here? Right, we've kind of talked about that perspective, we'll call it, right? Because really you have a encased body of this molten material, and technically it's lava that erupts at the surface. So some of it did come to the surface and go back down under the crust, but some of it went under the crust and stayed under the crust, and so it maybe never has seen the atmosphere, so to speak, unless it's rubbing elbows with a lava that did go up and come back down. So maybe you could call it magma, right? You can maybe justify that, and so it kind of is a big reservoir of magma, essentially right at the surface, very surface, like a surface pond of it in some ways. So I think it's just semantics at this point, but I like considering those kind of things, Mark. So thanks for that question. We have any other Kilauea questions, Dan, you want to throw in here at this point before we get to any earthquakes and Mauna Loa stuff?
Yeah, there is one we had from Dude came through. He had a $1.99 super chat, and he was asking about the frequency of the HVO updates, specifically more like the flyovers and the maps and things along those lines. Not specifically, like the daily updates or even the more comprehensive update that we get, every few weeks or month. But the other types of updates that keep the people enjoy more, like the visual stuff and the graphs and things along those lines, the maps. So is there any thoughts on their scheduling?
Yeah, I mean, we really don't have any inside information. We'd love to be able to get that from them directly. But we do know what they are putting out, right? They're putting out still their every couple of weeks maps that's pretty usual. Every couple of weeks the maps are kind of on schedule still. That's still coming out. We haven't seen as many photos maybe, right? But really a lot of the photos are similar to things that we've seen, and maybe the staff has been preparing to deploy to Samoa is probably the big part of it, right? And we'll get to Samoa here shortly, but right, they have several staff there. They've had to actually take full advanced seismometers over there. I think they have 3 installations by today. Before that, they had sent 2 smaller micro seismometers, right? So that, imagine like they kind of send the advanced temporary stuff, and meanwhile, they're still in the lab working on the permanent stuff to actually get them ready to send off the following week. And so they've probably been doing all that kind of stuff as far as the different departments in HVO. Like they have electronics that builds a lot of that stuff, and they have the seismic, and then they have to integrate it into the network. When they get there, they have now they're dealing with the data quality, all that kind of stuff, trying to calibrate things. It's a whole setup process, right? It's a whole almost like a campaign. It's like, right, a whole impromptu drop everything and go and research this and try to have all the right technology, equipment, and all the other stuff you need, plans, and leave people here in Hawaii filling your normal responsibilities, right? Whatever that may be. So that'll be my guess, based on what we're seeing them put out, right? And they seem pretty responsive otherwise. And they seem to, after Dane was asking for INSAR, there was an INSAR released shortly thereafter, not too long ago, a couple weeks ago. So it's more just, I think, what's happening in Samoa would be my guess.
Yeah, that really drops a wrench in when you're like, okay, your scope of operations just greatly expanded. Good luck. I know it's more complicated than that, more professional, but still, I didn't know that HVO would be responding as they did to, earthquakes in Samoa, especially when we're considering that Samoa is more like a Hawaiian volcano than, say, Krakatoa or something like that, where the tsunami risk is much higher. So that's, interesting. Definitely take more time. We do have one more question here for you.
Well, just follow up on that real quick, though. I mean, we'll get to this later, but there's an account now from that 1868, I want to say, undersea eruption, and there was rocks shooting 2,000 feet in the air through the water, right? And a giant plume of gas, and people had to evacuate the village because of all of the fog, presumably, right? So it could get pretty intense in other ways, right? Not maybe not in potentially life-threatening ways, but it's almost worse to have everyone just worrying about what could happen, and all the time.
Right. Yeah, panic is real. Mark has a question for you. He asks, are fusion rates decided by monitoring SO2 emissions?
That's been one association that's been made in the past, is that SO2 emissions have been tied to fusion rates, and so because that correlation has been so strong in the past, we kind of come into the discussion presuming that's the case today. So it's hard to measure the rates directly, right? Unless you have, we have an ideal situation here for these intervals that we had. We had a big giant crater that we knew exactly the topography of, right, from the LiDAR scans, the drone scans, and all that, and then we have it filling that space, and then we can take a new image and have a new surface, and we can actually do the volumes that way, right? That's how they're figuring out the volumes that they're reporting.
Right. But you get into something like 2018, where we're trying to figure out the depth of the channel to figure out the volume, because and that was a big question, right? How deep is it? Because we couldn't solve for anything like that without knowing.
Yeah.
But them being able to just look at the SO2 emissions, even though they were, remember those SO2 emissions, what that was being said on the ground then and what we kind of acknowledge now is basically double in terms of the total emissions that we're talking about there.
Right. So that's what I would say. Yeah. I mean, the measurements were off the charts, right? So like if we had actually got the right measurements that were twice what we saw, then that would have answered the question that the Mauna Loa coming out was twice what we thought also. And that, has a whole bunch of cascading implications from there.
Right. Okay, but it just bogged out or went past the monitor's ability to be able to actually detect that accurately.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of reminds me of the old the seismometers, like the Alaska earthquake that sent the tsunami to Hawaii. Always trying to figure out how big really was it, because the seismometers, all of them around there, they just couldn't handle that size of an earthquake. And,
Yeah, it's difficult, right?
You learn from it. Yeah, you learn from it, so next time you're able to handle it. But yeah, that was 2018.
Yeah, so it can go any direction, right? So I mean, there were times when there was no summit eruption and all the lava was coming out of Pu'o'o, and you could measure the entire emission rate coming out of one spot, which was Pu'o'o. And you can really tie, that's an area when you really have fairly constrained SO2 emission rates, and maybe it's hard to measure how much lava is pouring in the ocean because it's pouring in the ocean. So you have an unconstrained volume, but you have a better constrained SO2. There's times like that, and there are other times where maybe the SO2 is leaking out across that entire 280 acres, and it's hard to measure it all, and so it's hard to pin that down exactly, but you actually can measure the volume easier because it's in one giant hole, right? Or there could be times where, where you can't measure either because it's so giant, like 2018, because the sulfur's off the charts and lava is all pouring in the ocean, and the end we found out was over half the lava poured in the ocean. So it's fascinating, but yeah, to answer Mark's questions, it can go either way, right? So when you can't get good volume comparisons, you might use SO2 emission rates, and if you can get better volumes, you use the better volumes. Yeah.
All right. Well, I do want to take the opportunity to shout out a couple of the super chats that we had come through. One was from Christopher, 1999 super chat. It says, "Always look forward to these weekly updates. Thank you guys for keeping up with all the information on the volcano and what's happening in the community. Appreciate the support there, Christopher." We also had $1.99 from the dude. We tackled that question. Hopefully we're able to answer it for you. And then we had a $9.99 super chat from Yan Zhao, who says, "I enjoy your channel. I saw there was an earthquake. Stay safe." I think that was the earthquake on the 22nd, that magnitude 4.0 Deep Bahala earthquake. Didn't change anything. Those earthquakes, they're kind of the odd man out in terms of meaning things. A lot of the times it's just like, we can kind of just ignore those. But sorry to take it there, but yeah, appreciate you guys and the support. Also appreciate everybody that turned out today. We rely on viewers like you to get this information out there. If you like this, give a like, give a subscribe, consider sharing it on social media. That really does help, work with the algorithm, get this seen by more people. And really that's what we're trying to do, is just, get this information, the good information, out to as many people as possible. We know there's a lot of somewhat crazy stuff on YouTube, but we're trying to be more sound. So yeah, if you appreciate that kind of philosophy and how we do this, consider that like, subscribe, and all that.
Yeah, thanks, Dane. So yeah, here is speaking of earthquakes, let's transition to our earthquakes. So 1 year earthquakes on Kilauea is still pretty low here. We can see the last big spike was January, when we had some adjustment there, but really no real change in eruption since then. So these things can happen without a whole lot of surface effect. Here's over the last month, pretty steady. The map for the last week. And if anything, if I zoom it in, sometimes it doesn't respond. There it is. If I zoom it in, if anything, maybe you're seeing a little bit more dispersed earthquakes here on this Mauna Loa side, but nothing really unusual. They have to adjust between them as well. More so that than more so that than the earthquakes right underneath the caldera and the summit crater there. So I'll just move on from that. We'll look at the earthquake map for the whole island. And over the last week, we had the largest was a 4.0 Pahala, deep 31 kilometers down, 32 kilometers down. And this did prompt from the USGS information statement on Monday, 8:14 p.m. And so you can see this new format for magnitude 4 and greater events. And this note here, magnitude 4, 6 miles east of Pahala, depth of 20 miles, 32 kilometers below sea level. No apparent impact on either Mauna Loa or Kilauea volcanoes. Part of the same seismic swarm, and it's basically falls under the same pattern. Nothing really unusual or anything else we can say there, besides that it was felt in a lot of different places. I did have a question that came in from some people that I have not answered yet this go around, But there's quite a bit of variation where people actually feel the earthquakes, right? The earthquake occurs down over here in Pahala, but people across Hilo to Puna, some felt it and some didn't feel it, and it's hard to tell exactly why that might be. Some of the factors are that local, whatever the local geology is around you. You know, if you're on some particular kind of lava flow that's more solid, will shake more. If you're in an area that's closer to the rift zone, then sometime, or the summit as well, right? The magma in the reservoir can absorb some of that seismic energy. Right? Basically, it's a big fluid that can agitate a little bit. I mean, not a huge amount, but it can absorb some of that earthquake energy. And you almost have like a shadow, like, you know, some directions the earthquake waves can't get there because they would have to go directly through that big magma pocket or magma body. So it can get spotty. That's one of the cool things that can happen when you have these big earthquakes traveling in these volcanic systems. And it's nothing alarming for the eruption, just a little cool little effect that we seem to talk about quite often when we talk about different people feeling the effects in different places around Kilauea especially. So that was the biggest event, was at 4.0. You can see 3.2, 3.1, 3.0, 2.9 all followed, or all kind of in a similar area at similar depths. And otherwise, we have a few down here in Loihi, but with a normal pattern. Kilauea pattern is fairly normal. There's one interesting deep one, 44K offshore here, but that's been happening as well. Mauna Loa is ongoing still, so we're still seeing that adjustment, the summit and northwest quadrant. And one earthquake here on that west flank. And these background events over near Waimea, some deeper ones, and one shallower one as well. But really nothing unusual going on with the earthquakes here this week. We can focus a little more on Mauna Loa. So here's the earthquake rates for the past month on Mauna Loa. Let's try to reload it and hope it doesn't break. Yeah, seems like it succeeded there. So you can see fairly low rates, below 20 earthquakes per day within that upper summit mapping area. So really, we seem to have come and gone past that event seismically at the very least. And since we're switching to talking about Mauna Loa, let's make it say that on the screen here. Then move from the past month to the past year. So here's the last year, and you can see that's that event that we had earlier in the month. And it is higher than other events in the last year, but really it's, if you look at the longer perspective, it's because the last year's been fairly quiet. There was one somewhat close seismic swarm as well that occurred back in the spring. But really we got to zoom back out to the last 5 years of Mauna Loa. And so here we are at the far right end of that plot, with this more recent activity compared to what we've seen in spring of 2021, when we had much larger changes in seismicity and in GPS, and still didn't have any summit eruption, right? So there's quite a lot of change that can happen without eruption, and that seems to be the pattern that we've been. The last eruption being 1984, so it's been a while. Meanwhile, at the summit, there's the last 24 hours of Mauna Loa, everything is pretty quiet. So, the most recent update from Mauna Loa, here it is from today. Not erupting, still advisory alert level and aviation code yellow, and all the streams showing no significant changes. 118 earthquakes over the last week. Some at upper elevation flanks, most at shallow depths less than 9 miles below sea level. So low rates of deformation in the summit over the past week. They're really not noting any major change there. We were looking at some of this monitoring data last week, so let's follow up on that. Here's a map on the summit area with the north and the south part of that GPS line, and then a tilt meter MOK that's stationed here on this northwest part of the caldera. So here's a tilt for the last week, and you really don't see much apart from this up and down daily variation on the tilt over the last week. If we go back to the last month, you can see more of what we're looking for. There's this little offset that occurs right here that corresponds to that seismicity and change. So that's the kind of thing you're looking for, is this not the little wiggles up and down, but the baseline change from there to there, and maybe wiggling a little bit, right? That's the real signal that you're looking for, something like that. And hard to tell what's really going on over here on the right side and how sensitive it is. It hasn't ever been as sensitive before, which is why we have a hard time being very, very sure that when you see these little wiggles, there actually are something occurring with that magmatic system now affecting the tilt meter. So the tilt's hard to tell much happening in more recent time. And we'll follow up on a GPS. Here is the last year of GPS cross Caldera north to south. Let's zoom it in. And we ignored this high point last week, and we see now that we seem to have somewhat normalized once again, right? The rate is still rising. If you wanted to, you could maybe try to wiggle it some more in there, but really the window is such like that, right? And it just continues to be a fairly regular rise here. And if I zoom it back out, you can see we've had similar rises and variations and wiggles before, especially within the last, if we go beyond the last year to the last 5 years here, where you can see there it is back in the spring of 2021, quite a bit more movement, both down and up, down first, then up, then down again, before this long-term pattern resumed, and still no eruption or anything like that. And so when we talk about what background is on Mauna Loa, that's why it becomes such a really tricky question, right? You know, do you count all this activity that occurs when it can wiggle so much up and down and left and right and have all this seismicity? Is that part of background, you know, or is it part of the elevated background? Are we qualifying it? It just gets a little tricky to figure out what is and isn't. So it's easier to talk about what looks like it is getting close to eruption or not, and we're still nowhere near that. We're still in this range of this kind of wiggles can still occur during a normal period like the last 5 years, where you had quite a bit of change, right? Look at this rise all through here that occurred post 2018 all the way till that spring of 2021 when it did that little wiggle finally. And then since then it's been coming back up at a slightly lower rate, and if it's coming a little higher, if anything, it's getting back to what it used to be for that long period of time. And so for the last 2 years, right, the background is pretty high bar there, one point of view. Looking at the vertical motion is a little more interesting, because we saw more of these data points clustering upwards, and you can see there's still a little bit on the high side, but if you really think of it, only two that are a little bit out of order. If you draw this window coming through here and back through here as well, it's really a similar mostly upward trend within a similar variation, and it looks like it's going up a little bit more, but it's getting less convincing. It's less convincing this week than it was last week. And that's why we have to wait and see these adjustments and refinements to the calculations here. So in the 5-year plot, it's still coming up as a little wiggle coming up, and we'll just have to wait and see whether it turns out to be one of these things, or if it's more of one of these things. It could be either one. It's hard to tell, because it's a slow process to get enough of these data points to really believe the trend when you have this much of variation, right? So that's as much as we can say on Mauna Loa right now. Do you see the question from the dude here? There are 12 readings above the July 1st high and a summit vertical lift. So maybe in here. And there's no more background noise, and so yeah, that's where it's hard to tell if this is all background noise or not. But you know, like I said, you could consider as little as 2 anomalously high measurements. We have 1 on the other plot, so that's just 1 more, and otherwise everything seems to fit within this range that we've been seeing here, right? So it's in the background, as I just said, is a moving target, right? So certainly you could say that the volcano is moving, magma's coming into it, it's adjusting in subtle ways, but it's not doing it in any threatening way that you'd see it's building towards an eruption anytime soon. Right? Eventually it's going to happen, but for that to occur, you'd want to see something more like, let's see here, 1975 seismicity coming up, right, where the earthquakes come up to thousands of earthquakes per day, and that occurs up to like a year in advance of the actual lava coming out of the ground, 75, or we look at, oh, where's my 84? Oh, maybe I don't have an 84. So in any case, that's the answer on Mauna Loa there. There is only one thing I wanted to bring up on our community corner this week, but it is an interesting revisit here. So let's do community corner and look at this post on Hawaii Tracker that Dane shared earlier today from one of our Pune residents who photographed. Let's see if I can blow this up. Over Kalapana today, helicopter pulling the AEM rig. And I guess it's been long enough that he was wondering what was going on. So Dane was able to inform him there and point out the flight lines and all of that. And just to follow up, let's go to the USGS page here. That puts out the schedule. And now in our activity timeline, down in this overview section, we have August 25th and 24th listed there, flights beginning yesterday and coming into today.
Yeah, so they had a little bit of break on those overflights. You can see there July 29th to the 24th. Didn't really have much going on, but they seemed to hop back into it. Now they're more over the residential areas, so it's more likely for people just to see them out and about. And I'm still waiting for them to kind of be over Leilani, expecting it decently soon. Not even sure exactly how far into Leilani they're going to push. Some of the maps haven't been exactly detailed but hey, when they come, try and get a picture of him out over like Fisher 8 and that kind of stuff if they do fly it. I assume they should. I mean, the way they were talking about uninhabited areas, I mean, that there's nothing inhabited right there. A couple streets over from what would be the old streets there is, but yeah, you can still fly over non-inhabited areas now in Leilani and all that kind of stuff. So expecting that to happen in the next couple of weeks, but depending on the scheduling.
Yeah, and in the presentation, they talked about how they can be flying. They can just go right around a house, and it's not some. They can actually be pretty precise and make sure that they don't. I mean, and even so, like there's no risk really. It's like the electromagnetic field of a toaster. They were saying, yeah. So it's just hanging way above, so it's really not going to affect anyone. But of course, there are all these safeguards. You still don't want that thing dangling over your house. I'm pretty sure. So they do go around people's houses, and maybe we'll if you're watching this on YouTube, you can go back and find a presentation if you're interested in that. That was done about a month and a half ago, and we'll repost it on Facebook if you're catching us on Facebook to bring that fresh to the top of that feed once again here shortly in the next day or two. So you can check that out, and that is it.
Go ahead.
That's it for the yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
I'll go ahead and throw a link to that in the chats. Yeah, in case anybody wants more information about that survey.
Yeah, if there's anything else about Mauna Loa, we can discuss it here. Otherwise, I can keep going and get into Samoa a little bit.
No, really, the only thing is just it's a question that we've had for a while about what is background rates at Mauna Loa. It seems the argument I've made for a little while is it seems like the bar isn't exactly set right or tuned right on that one for what is background. Mm-hmm. Considering that it took a legendary eruption of Kilauea to basically create the circumstance for that to happen, to meet that level, which is now defined as background. It seems like that was below background, but hey, that's not me making those lines on what it is. But when Mauna Loa sits, I mean, most of my life, Mauna Loa felt like it's been in yellow, right? So, I'd like to see the improvement on that system constantly being made. If it means redefining what is background on Mauna Loa, so be it. If it means, better utilizing Kilauea's system, yeah, we got to do that too. We can't be going green to red and skipping 2 steps, stuff like that. That shouldn't happen. So yeah, the system's good the way it's been defined. It's just making it work for each volcano, because each volcano is different. Each red, each yellow, all the way down, they mean something else,
right?
Depending on what you're talking about exactly.
Yeah, good
But
points.
yeah, that's the last I got on Mauna Loa. Was just thinking that from the dude's question, because we've debated that for a while on what should be background.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. They're different levels, right? Yeah, for sure. So not exactly the most straightforward answer, dude, but that's what we got today.
Yep.
Just the straight up discussion of it. So maybe we'll pivot to Samoa here.
All right.
Let's finish up with that. I know we're over the hour mark here already, and let's come in and see what we can talk about Samoa. I got a few little surprises for you guys today, and see what you think about some of this stuff, Dane. But first, orient you where we are. American Samoa, southwest of Hawaii, not quite to New Zealand over there. And in Samoa, there's a main island of Tutuila, Pago Pago, capital is there, and then the Manua Islands east of here, and Vailulu'u Seamount, where the active hotspots thought to be of this Samoan hotspot trail that kind of goes off in that direction like that, right? Older to the west. So focusing on the Manua Islands right in here, that's where we have a combination of Ofu and Olosega Islands that are nearly touching, and then Ta'u over here on the right. And this is the largest, youngest island here, closest to the hotspot, since the hotspot's now thought to be underneath a seamount, so it's all hasn't emerged above the waves yet. So that's where we are. Since we did a little bit of background, we won't cover the same background from last week, but let's load up the raspberry shake here that's linked by the USGS. Let's give us a minute here to pull in the data, and it's the live feed from Ta'u, American Samoa. You can see these big spikes or earthquakes still happening. The way this reads is it's 8:30 here, and usually it's 15 minutes all the way across to here, and then you come back over here, or it looks like it's 30 minutes, and come over here, it becomes 9 o'clock, and then it goes all the way to 9:30, then 9:30 picks up over here. That's how the time goes on these things. And so you just look for these spikes, and this one event is happening, in this case 11:45-ish or 12-ish, is overriding all the lines above and below it, but really it's coming at the center of it. It's where it's occurring, and you can see it's like there's basically one earthquake, there's another earthquakes that are fairly decent size, and have little ones as well, and maybe you're starting to get a little indication of this is the kind of thing you'd look for tremor, looking for more smaller signals up and down all the time that might indicate some kind of eruption beginning, something like that. But a little bit that could be magma moving subsurface. No real indication of anything convincing yet, but this is of course just the preliminary raw data from the raspberry shake, right? And so let's get better information here. Let's look at the USGS update. These are daily updates coming out now for Ta'u Island Volcano, and Ofu Olosega is similarly referring to the same update. There are two different volcanoes, the activities happening between them. Since it's closer to Ta'u, we're going to call it Ta'u from this point forward. But it is now at alert level advisory, aviation color code yellow. And you can see the most recent update as of a little more than an hour ago. There's been no significant change since yesterday. USGS staff have installed 3 sophisticated seismometers on Manua Islands, 2 on Ta'u Island and 1 on Ofu Island. USGS earthquake experts are evaluating data as it becomes available to locate earthquakes and understand the processes causing them. Over the past 24 hours, approximately 30 earthquakes per hour have been recorded. Preliminary estimates place the source of the earthquakes closer to Ta'u Island than to Ofu Olosega. So let's go back over here to the map, right? So closer to Ta'u than to Olosega. But the seismometers are being placed on both islands to try to pin down exactly where it is in between there. 3 new sophisticated and accurate seismometers have been installed to form a more robust seismic monitoring network. As the network becomes operational, USGS scientists calibrate equipment and fortify the data transmission process so that the earthquake data is made available in real time. This process takes time, and USGS scientists are actively working on it. Satellite check on August 25th showed no visible volcanic activity in the Ta'u Island area. Staff from the USGS HVO and NOAA NWS, along with the Lieutenant Governor, met with the communities of Ofu and Olosega today. The community meeting will be held with the Ta'u community tomorrow. So that's the most recent update from today. still unclear if it will escalate to eruptions. If it does, these hazards would include volcanic gases, low-level localized explosions of lava flows, earthquake shaking, and tsunami. So that's the potential impact there. The primary hazard currently of concern is earthquake shaking, although no big enough earthquakes have occurred to cause much damage there. Largest maybe in the 3 to 4 magnitude range. So that's a lot of what's up here. Let's just also bring up the update from yesterday. Come on. Because it gives a little more detail on what happened with that larger earthquake. So yesterday they had installed 2 of the seismometers. Most earthquakes were between magnitude 2 and 3. At 8:33 p.m. Samoa Standard Time, August 23rd, residents of Manua Islands and Tutuila Island reported a widely felt earthquake, maximum intensity of 5 on a modified Mercalli intensity scale. One of the largest instruments, this is when an earthquake is one of the largest recorded to date since instruments were installed on the Manua Islands beginning in the second week of August. The magnitude, which is likely magnitude 3 or larger, will be determined at a later date if possible when American Samoa seismic network has been calibrated. Reports of booming sounds continue to be investigated, but to date have not correlated with specific seismic events. So that's the little bit from yesterday, and did I read the part here today where it says the widely felt earthquake was estimated between magnitude 3 and 3.5. And so that's the seismicity that's going on there. I was going to point out a couple other things about that's have been put online by the USGS. So this is, once again, just all USGS info that we're just repackaging for you guys here. And there's a geology and history for the Ta'u Island page, and you can scroll down here and let's go past the satellite image here and maybe answer some of these most common questions. Ta'u Island is the top of a shield volcano, most of which is beneath the ocean. The top of the island is more than 3,000 feet above sea level, but the flanks extend another 9,000 feet below sea level to the ocean floor. So it's got a summit caldera, although the southern part's been largely removed by landslides. 2 rift zones on Ta'u, one to the northeast and one to the northwest. The northwest rift zone of Ta'u lines with the Samoan Ridge. The feature formed with largely by volcanic activity with a Samoan hotspot. So let me switch here to the map and look at the show you guys this map from Stearns back in 1944. So there is our Ofu Olosega Island there, and it's showing you approximately where the caldera used to be. Right? And you can see largely the volcano's collapsed. The approximate original outline of the volcano would have been something like this, like that, with the caldera right there. But mostly it's been broken apart. And scrolling over to Ta'u, there is that approximate outline of the caldera. And we don't have an idea of how much bigger the island was at some previous point. But clearly there have been some collapses that occur in an area. So that could be another potential thread, as if you have enough changing topography or earthquakes, you could maybe have some kind of collapses as well. So you see marked here this delineation. This is that northwest rift zone of Ta'u Island, lines up with Olosega Ofu, and right here in between, submarine eruption of 1866, right along that same rift zone right there. Right, so that is the most likely axis of what we're seeing this activity. We're talking about what might actually happen. It's likely to be something that's occurring offshore. If it was on land, you might more easily detect it. So our first presumption is offshore, right? So somewhere along this rift zone, offshore here. And if they're saying, okay, well, here's our halfway point, and they're saying it's closer to Ta'u than it is to Olosega, Ofu, that really is suggesting that it's somewhere in here. Right, we'll have to wait and see. Once everything is installed, we should see those earthquakes start popping up on our map as well, on the USGS feed and all of that. So we're not seeing them yet, but when we do, we won't be surprised to see them somewhere in that kind of window, somewhere there-ish, right? And you can see that aligns with this northwest rift zone of Ta'u, but offshore underwater too. So let's keep going here. I'll leave some of this for you guys to dive into a little bit of the more detailed volcanic history of volcanism on the islands. But there's Ta'u itself, and you can see here some of these tuff flows that are kind of explosive interactions with the water, and a little bit of the bathymetry of the ridge that extends offshore over here, right? So if we're looking at offshore Ta'u, here's what it might look like. This is 600 feet contours on the depth of the water offshore the island over here. So it does get 600 feet deep, but that it could be in 600 to 1,000 feet deep water you're looking at where this activity is occurring down in that area there. Okay, so east of here is Wailu'u, and it's worth looking at as an example of the kind of activity that can happen. So we'll look at 1866 as well, but Wailu'u is the other place that has had changes. So here is a 1999 survey of that summit caldera of that seamount, Wailu'u, and they came back and returned in 2005, and you can now see that little bump in there, a new little cone that formed from that material, volcanic material, being erupted under the water and actually piling up and forming a cone. So you can see that it's not exactly the same as on land above the water, but similar changes to the landform are evident. So that's Wailu'u. And actually, I think I can maybe scroll this over. There are, we'll point out some of these links. So there's a fact sheet of volcanic hazards in Pacific U.S. territories, and this describes the U.S.'s purview of volcanic monitoring and Northern Marianas, Guam, and American Samoa, right? And of course, Northern Marianas and are the ones that have had more activity. You can see so lots of. There's Guam down here at the bottom, and this is all this Northern Marianas, and all these red triangles are places that have had eruptions since 1800, and so quite a lot of activity occurring there. And I wanted to scroll down here and talk about Wailu'u, and there is a little better bathymetric map, right, with the cone named Nafanua cone there, and gives you a little bit of idea of the height of that within that bathymetric topography there, yeah. Okay, so, and if you're curious, that's what the actual eruption looks like. Here's that picture of pillow lavas that are a little bit broken off, but this is a picture taken about where that red dot is located on that map. A picture taken of this most recent lava flows, pillow lavas underwater, and similar to what you'd see in Hawaii, the basaltic kind of composition there, just oozing out like toothpaste underwater. So that's kind of activity that can happen. But probably the more useful example is the one that's not offshore to the east, but just kind of shows you that activity here is not that uncommon. But in 1866, there was a vent that occurred between Olosega and Ta'u Islands and formed a volcanic cone that was 150 feet beneath the ocean surface. So this has been attributed to Ofu Olosega volcano, but it's described below. And so let's come down here to look at 1866 between Ta'u and Ofu Olosega. Now, this is a picture of Diamond Head on Oahu, but it's a tuff cone, and Le'ahi, as it's known in Hawaiian, is that kind of eruption. So it's put here as an example of the kind of features that they actually form, whether it's underwater or on land. And so this eruption in 1866 was witnessed by a teacher that then told a reverend, Dr. Turner, who then wrote a letter to the Manchester Guardian newspaper on April 7th, 1867, and described this eruption to someone. So that's where a lot of this information comes from. But it's summarized as a shallow submarine eruption, at least 1 week in duration, that formed a submarine tuff cone approximately 2 miles southeast of Olosega. Volcanic tuffs are formed when eruptions occur through water, and they often occur near the coast or near offshore environment. The interaction of water and lava results in an explosive type of eruption called a phreatomagmatic eruption. Le'ahi, also known as Diamond Head, on the island of Oahu in the state of Hawaii, is an example of a tuff cone. The account of the 1866 eruption below suggests that it was phreatomagmatic in nature. It describes earthquakes being felt by residents of the Mauna Islands very often, 3 to 4 per hour, for several days leading up to the eruption. The first day of eruption was marked by waves looking like they were breaking over shallow reef or rocks. The following 5 days were marked by intermittent phreatomagmatic eruptions generating great jets of mud and dense columns of other volcanic matter, an estimated 2,000 feet, 600 meters, into the air. Eruption continued with explosive events less frequently and at a lower level, call it 20 to 30 feet or 6 to 9 meters above sea level, for the rest of that week. And the cone form reached to an estimated 150 feet beneath the ocean surface. Here is a multi-beam bathymetry scan from NOAA. And on this map, there is Ofu'olosega Island. And if I zoom it in, if it'll let me zoom it into this bottom right corner over here. There it is. Like, there is that likely 1866 event. You see a little bit of that similar outline of that tough cone visible in a scan right there. So pretty cool to see that. Not too far offshore and right in line with that rift, right? So that's the kind of thing that could happen. And since it is a kind of thing and we have so little information on what to go and what to expect, I will go into a little bit more, right? And highlight a little bit of this letter that he wrote. There's quite a lot of it. He kind of sets it all up here. And we'll start it right here. At first, the eruptions were at intervals of about an hour. They went on increasing for 2 days, and on the 15th, they were 50 in the hour. For 3 days longer, there was one continued succession of outbursts. The natives gazed in amazement as the great jets of mud and dense columns of other volcanic matter rising in terrific grandeur 2,000 feet above the level of the sea. These again branched out into clouds of dust, blackening the sky and covering up Olosenga from the sight of people on Ta'u. The roar of the eruptions and the collision and crash of the masses of rock, met in their downward course from the clouds by others flying up, were fearful. Quantities of fused obsidian, too, threw off the most lovely fragments, which shone and sparkled in the sunlight like thousands of pendants from a crystal gaselier. No flame appeared, and only once or twice was there a gleam of fire seen in a matter thrown up. The sea was most violently agitated and boiled and bubbled furiously in a great basin half-mile in diameter. After a time, the ocean had a light sulfur tinge for 10 miles round. Heaps of dead fish were washed ashore, and among them deep-sea monsters, 6 and 12 feet long, which the natives had never seen before, and for which they have no name. The sulfurous vapors, heat and smoke, and ashes soon made the settlement on Olosenga, in line with the volcano, unbearable. The people fled to a place a little to the south. Slight tremulous motion continued to be felt on land, but no fissures opened, nor have any hot springs made their appearance. The ordinary springs of fresh water are also unaffected, and after 3 days of violent action began to abate, by which time the informant left. So we'll stop it there. But that's a little bit. There's a little bit more in that account there, and I'll show you guys where all this actually is. So let's start off here. Bring you to, hopefully this works, the front page of the USGS HVO. And if you scroll it down here, we have our normal boxes, Kilauea, Mauna Loa, but you keep going, now there's a third box for Ta'u Island. So you can click on that to actually get the Ta'u Island index page. And at some point, you'll be able to go on here and turn on these earthquakes and have them actually pop up on this map. But right now, nothing's turning up at the moment. But so down here, we can scroll down. We have some facts. This is where you link to the live seismic data. This is where you link to that public fact sheet, right? But there's also, if you come up here, besides update, there's this geology and history button. If you click that, that's where you end up back at what we're just looking at, this page that has all this history of Ta'u as well. And we'll leave it at Ta'u this week. We can maybe go into Ofu'olosega a little bit more next week, because we'll probably be talking about this for a little while. There's one last surprise that I'm going to share with you guys here from Ta'u. And this is a video from Solar City, Tesla, that actually features Ta'u. And so Ta'u, we'll let it play here. I'm going to turn off the sound. Turns out to be a place that Solar City Tesla has invested to build an entire electric grid from solar panels and Tesla batteries. This is one of their type sites in the world, right? Because everything was shipped in with diesel before, and there you have their new 1.4 megawatt. This was back in, I want to say, 2016, with 6 megawatt hours of storage array, right? 60 Tesla power packs, and can recharge itself fully in 7 hours, I think it's going to say, right? It can stay powered fully 3 days without the sun, and there it is, recharges in 7 hours of sunlight. So I bring this up. Every home benefits from clean energy. Energy is good and all that, but imagine if you're the USGS and you're coming in, and now you have to try to install these seismometers and run all this equipment, right? A lot of the stuff can stand on its own, but you need computers to send it to, and the computers to process stuff, and so it gets complicated. Imagine doing that on that island that is completely electric powered now. So I just thought I'd throw that in there for variety. And I'll get Dana on here to see what he thinks about that.
Yeah. So my first impression was to start at the last thing. I was actually looking at Ta'u a little bit, while you were talking, and I saw this as well, but I also saw that the population is 600 people, right? So, they're tooting the horn, but that's really not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. Like, it's more of a novelty, if anything. And that the one area that's occupied, it seems primarily is on that eastern shoreline, and they got that main strip of road that you see sometimes in the video here. Otherwise, primarily unoccupied, which is good considering you're on, an active volcano of this magnitude, where most of it's tough cone and stuff like that. Speaking of tough cone, that's where my second question comes in. I pulled up a bathymetry. It's slightly different than the one that you had up, but same thing kind of goes. I just have a hard time visualizing a caldera similar to Diamond Head that then collapses. Like, to me, just, naive looking at this, it almost feels more like something like an ashen tuff cone, like Green Lake, the Kapoho crater, where was heavily favored one side as opposed to the other, and it shows in the formation. It just gets so deep so fast right in the middle of that thing. That's the interesting thing to me. It's like it gets so deep out there. That's a huge amount of land to move.
Yeah, I mean, you could have collapses in some cases, right? But I mean that right. You'd expect that to happen more so on a large edifice, the large seamount, you might say, for example, right? Like, so if you have it could have landslides, or could have lava flows, and then you might imagine, or like Loihi, right? Lava flows out the side, then you can have some kind of collapse of a crater. But you could actually just have it venting out and just piling up, and not piling up like right next to the hole, but because it's underwater, it's going to pile up a little bit further out.
Right.
Depending on the size of the jet or whatever, you can actually just naturally be further out, like Diamond Head. But it's more of the falling out rather than any kind of collapsing in that situation, right? It's just building up. And yeah, it's kind of just like an underwater rift eruption in some ways, and short and sweet. Could be a week kind of thing, but we're really gonna wait and see, right? It's not an area that obviously built a volcano before, and it has built other volcanoes nearby, and just not in that exact spot.
Yeah, the caldera to me just is like, wait, what am I looking at here? Type of thing.
Yeah.
Especially when I was like, looking at just the above the waterline level, and that was, interesting enough. Then I pulled the bathymetry, and it's like, okay, what is going on with this thing? It gets really deep really quickly out where basically the center of the caldera should be, or something along those lines.
Right. So I probably wouldn't call it a caldera at all, because I don't see any collapse, right? And I kind of saying caldera implies that to me. It's more just, it's like a cone, it's a tough cone, right? It's kind of forms that sprawled shape, but it's not really a collapse. Like, it's not,
that makes more sense.
You could call it a crater, I guess, but it's, more of just a wide sprawled cone, a tough cone, right?
Right.
Probably how we should go at it.
Yep. Okay, the final thing I have, since I do, I love history. I delve into a lot of different types, but not this. But just looking at the story, it's interesting to me. A few things stand out. First, we have to acknowledge that this is not a firsthand source. When you're doing history, you love those firsthand accounts, but this is relayed information, right? Which you automatically put an asterisk next to. But the interesting thing to me is the specifics, right? The height of the thing, the timings of the thing. It's like, man, this not only did this guy remember it, if this story is, completely accurate, not only did this guy remember it, but the woman that saw it, the teacher that then relayed the information, remembered very specific information herself to relay. Either that or, it's what happens in a lot of history. It gets embellished upon.
Yeah.
Blank spots get filled in by what you think happened, and telephone game
Right.
and all those things play into it as well. But yeah, just had to recognize, like, love the account. It's not a firsthand source. Those firsthand sources, they carry more weight with them.
Yeah. You got to consider the time as well, right? I mean, in that era, I mean, it's not that everyone was doing it, but people who were educated certainly knew that that was how records were kept, was by people writing things down, right? So that's why, like, even in Kapoho 1960, there was someone who just sat there and counted earthquakes and made little notes in a book. So, I mean, there was kind of just a tradition. So when I hear that as a teacher, I think that he or she was educated and more likely to do that than someone random. And, and so it's true.
Handled stress really well to be able to do that kind of stuff under the pressure, right?
Yeah.
To take those kind of notes if it's your first rodeo.
Yeah, it seemed like the person had been there for a while, right? And just happened to catch it at the tail end of before they were supposed to leave. And like, oh, you never guess what started happening before I had to leave Tau. Kind of thing, right? When he goes to...
Yeah. I'm sorry to throw
reverend,
shadows over the thing, but whenever
absolutely.
you deal with history, you always have to question the sources and how close were they to the actual event and things along those lines. And like even biases you can learn things off of by sources and stuff like that. So it's a great accounts to have, regardless of their accuracy. Just having them is important, right? Because that gives us, you got to start somewhere in the equation to solve, for what actually happened in history, and those accounts are what you start plugging in, right, and then working with.
Yeah, for sure. That's exactly. Put an asterisk next to it, but yeah, it's something to go on,
important
right?
Data point. Yeah. And better than nothing for sure, because that's usually what you end up working with is, if you don't have an account like that, you got nothing, and you're starting from scratch, and you're like, this rock looks interesting. I wonder what happened here.
Yeah. Let's see. I have a. So I mean,
the Pacific is the deepest body of.
Stop. The reason I bring it up is I was trying to maybe help with some expectation of what you might actually imagine this to be, right? So what you could imagine, and so that one account just gives you an idea of what maybe, if it can keep going on long enough, right? That was what made 2018 unique, is that we had it going into the ocean for 3 months, right? So I mean, if it only lasts for a week, then you might at the tail end, but it really helps to have it that long-term source. So
yeah,
that's the only reason I bring up the account and bring up this little video clip from place that I haven't identified to you guys, is just give you some idea of what we could be in for, different style than obviously we saw in Tonga. That's kind of, everyone's talked about that proximity, which is a good opportunity to talk about the differences in those volcanoes, right? It's really the lava chemistry is different, and viscosity. We went into all that last week. So that's really it for Samoa there. I was trying to see if the Volcano Watch had been put out yet this week. I don't see it yet. So
I don't see it either.
We'll just leave it until next week. Maybe we can catch them both up. And so that brings us to the end of our content for today, Dan.
All right. Well, there's a couple super chats I want to acknowledge. One was a $10 super chat from JW. No comment on that one. Appreciate the support there, JW. Then longtime supporter Gary Bryan came in with a regular $35 super chat. Thank you, Philip and Dane. Appreciate that continued support, Gary.
Mahalo, Gary.
And that'll do it on the super chats. Just a reminder, we do normally stream at 5 p.m. Hawaii Standard Time on Thursdays. we do it on Thursdays kind of because we want the volcano watch to come in, and it normally does come in before we go live, so we can bring that to you fresh. But also that Mauna Loa update is also dropped on Thursdays, and we really like having that fresh information with us when we talk Mauna Loa. So that's where we are, 5 p.m. Hawaii Standard Time, Thursdays. That's our regular time. If something crazy happens, big earthquake that's a lot bigger than a 4.0 in Pahala, but a big earthquake, tsunami, something, eruption, we'll be going live and doing something, give you guys information that we can gather. But we don't really expect that right now. But hey, never know what can happen. We live on active volcanoes. But until unless something happens, we'll see you guys next week, same time, same place.
Yeah, mahalo Dane. Nice way to wrap it up. So until next week, everyone. From Hawaii Tracker, he's Dane DuPont. I'm Philip Ong. Aloha, everyone.